Hi, good evening, everyone, and welcome to another edition of our Justice and Pieces guest speaker series. Today's guest is a senior associate at Pallet Vallow, and he is a former classmate of mine, as quite a few of our guests have been from Osgood many, many moons ago. So thank you very much, Mr. Dan Waldman, for joining us. Perhaps, Dan, you could start by giving a little rundown from Osgood, I suppose, to where you are today, and talk to us a bit about what got you into the legal profession and what you're doing right now.
Okay, well, thanks for having me back. It's good to see you, JP. And thank you, everyone who is tuning in. This is a great series. I'm glad people watch it. Where to start? Like JP said, him and I were classmates, graduated in 2009. It's been a while. The law was something I was always interested in. Before I went to law school, I was a journalist. I did a career in journalism, and one thing that always stood out is when I was in journalism school, we learned a lot about the law, about what we could and couldn't do and write and report, and I always had a keen interest in that. And the people who taught that aspect of our classes were lawyers, and they always told me that I should think about going to law school because it seemed to pique my interest a lot. So after a few years in media, I did. I decided to give it a shot, and it's been great. I haven't looked back. And so my career has been focused on litigation. I started in the public service. I worked for the Ontario Securities Commission doing white collar prosecutions, and then I was at a bigger national firm, and now I'm at a mid-size, great full service firm, very reputable. And yeah, that's what I've been doing. I do a lot of litigation focusing on real estate matters, real property disputes, but I also do a range of things, including shareholder disputes, business matters, some public interest stuff, and yeah, I've been at it for around 10 years now, and it's been great.
Now, Dan, I guess since you brought up the background in journalism and writing, I think somewhere I read a quote, all lawyers are secretly want to be writers, but I guess maybe all writers also want to become lawyers as well. But how did you find, let's going back to Osgood, learning to write sort of from the legal kind of, doing case briefs and memos and legal writing, one of the first courses you'd have in Osgood there in the first semester. How did you find your background in journalism? How did that work? Did it work in your favor? Did it work against you when it came down to starting with your writing?
It didn't really work for or against me. I mean, I'd say it helps because when you write for a living, certain things become second nature, but not all writing is created equal. You know, every type of writing is always better if it's concise, to the point. Let's say forget the wind up, make the pitch. And that applies to reporting, feature writing, and legal writing to an extent. But for legal writing, there's a lot more technicalities, a lot more attention to detail. So, in some ways it works against you because you develop certain habits, but in other ways it works for you because you know the fundamentals and do it. But I felt like I was learning fresh, just like everyone else. I didn't feel like I had gotten any kind of head start when it came to legal writing. Like when you're drafting a news story and drafting a factum, I mean, it's apples to oranges. It's very different. Like I said, there's the concise part, and you're good with grammar and all that, but it's a very different beast.
Now, in terms of, I mean, certainly coming into written advocacy and what you've learned from going back all the way to law school, do you have any tips or anything in terms of, I love that, forget the wind up and get into the pitch. I've said it, I can't remember the justice from the, I don't know if it's the Superior Court or the Court of Appeal in Ontario that had the speech about that. But what can students do to get better and build on their writing so that when they do have to make submissions, written submissions later on, whether at a tribunal or a court, that it is more effective?
Well, just like anything else, it's something I always tell students when they're doing a research memo or anything else. Think about making your point. Don't ever think about wanting to impress your audience with anything. I mean, that only applies when you're writing fiction. You don't want to be clever. You don't want to show off how much you know. You don't want to muddle things or anything. You just kind of want to get to it. And, in written advocacy, one thing I've noticed and I learned the hard way throughout this profession is judges and other adjudicators don't really care about which writing is done better or who has nicer fonts or who has a nicer footnotes or whatever. I mean, I have lost motions and applications and other contested matters where I put in what I thought was a beautiful work product, where the other side had put in something that was like 1 page long and full of typos and looked like it was written on an old typewriter. Now, I'm not saying it's okay to write like that because some judges and others may take objection to it, but content matters more than style, always. So the tip I always give when you're doing pretty much any kind of writing, like I said, except for fiction writing, is at first think about the point you want to make and make it. If you need to bolster it, if you need to explain it, if you need to add things to it, do it. But don't think of throwing everything against a wall and hoping it will stick. And don't think for a second that a judge or anyone else will think, hey, it's impressive that he brought this in or anything. It only matters if it is relevant. It's the same way when you're, say, like drafting a factum and putting it towards before a court. And a factum requires, it's a statement of fact and law. So you need to put in case law to bolster your argument. You don't need 9 cases. You need one or two that are directly on point and on the money. If it's a wide issue and you need to introduce different arguments for different cases, go ahead. But if one side brings in one case, it's on the money, and the other side brings in 27 cases that are sort of ancillary, the judge or master or other adjudicator is not going to be impressed with that. Same if you're a student and you're doing a research memo or anything else, like get to the point. You don't want people flipping through pages saying, well, what's the point of this? What's the point of that? And that applies for anything. And sometimes it's something you just kind of have to get used to through trial and error. But once you do, you'll be thankful for it.
Now, thanks for sharing that. And certainly, once you have those written submissions, the next thing is you're going to have maybe a hearing where you're going to be asked questions from a judge or a master or a panel of judges.
Mm-hmm.
And how do you prepare for that? Now making taking your written submissions and making oral submissions. Is most of it reading essentially what you've written out, or you need to just be mostly prepared for the questions because they already have your written stuff, and if you've done a great job with that, they want to know the answers to their questions, right?
Yeah, yeah, no, definitely. I mean, I've seen lawyers, even like experienced lawyers, draft a factum, go to court, and then just read it, right? To just read what the judge already has in his or her hands with your factum. I've seen other lawyers give submissions that don't seem to touch at all upon what they've written. The gist is the same, but the content is different. What you need to do is, be respectful of your audience, the judge, the master, whoever else, if it's a speaking engagement, like your audience in any way. Be respectful of them. Approach them like, bearing in mind, thinking that they've read what you put in front of them, but at the same time, don't assume that they know your argument inside out. Like, I was interviewing a judge once for an article I was working on, and I was sitting in his chambers, and he pointed to like 9 bankers boxes up against a wall, and he says, like, you see this? This is for a motion I was hearing the other day. And the lawyer came up, didn't give me this person's name, which is good, and made submissions. And he just assumed that I knew where to find every piece of paper in these 9 bankers' boxes of documents, right? You don't want to make that assumption. Like, the point is, you want to convince the court to arrive at a certain decision, and you want to assist them in getting there, right? So, you have your written argument and you have your oral argument, and they need to complement each other. And it's okay to explain things, but always respect your audience, assume that they understand the gist of it. And when you're on your feet, nail down the parts that are most important. And if there's weaknesses in your argument, which there often are, be prepared to address them. Like a judge may ask you questions on the fly, or they may just let you give all your submissions, then ask questions, or they may ask nothing at all. But be sure to know the weaknesses and be prepared to address them. A lot of the time, lawyers and others make the mistake of just nailing down the points we're very strong on and kind of glossing over the weaknesses and hoping the judge won't notice. Judges and all adjudicators are very smart people, and they always will. So keep that in mind.
And how do you develop sort of that skill to be ready to answer the questions? I mean, just kind of seamlessly. Is it just a matter of experience, or what tips do you have maybe to get used to being asked something that's kind of going to veer you off maybe your script or your prepared remarks that you had?
Well, it is a matter of experience. And one of my early mentors always told me, like, you can't always count that you'll have better work than the other side. You can't always count that you'll be a better lawyer or that your argument will be better. But one thing you can guarantee is that you could always be better prepared than the other side. So that's what you need to do. You need to prepare backwards and forwards, always come to court knowing that you have covered every single base, and always be ready for it. Like, the number of times I've seen senior lawyers in front of like the Court of Appeal or whatever, faced with a difficult question, and it is kind of, clam up tense right away to think, oh my God, I hadn't thought about that. And then they give an answer that's completely unsatisfactory to the judge. And when that happens, you see the judge is tapping away on their laptops, meaning they're already writing their judgments, right? They've already thought, okay, he can't get past this argument. Sometimes you're going to have a weakness that you can't get past. That's not your fault. That's the facts of the case, and that's the law. But you have to be ready to address that. And you always can. You can always be prepared.
So in terms of preparation, what can you do in terms of trying to anticipate things that may come up, as well as just making sure your points there are on point with respect to the law and the facts of the case?
Well, I mean, you can't always know exactly what's going to happen. And, you learn that. Remember, we learned this thing the hard way in law school, and we had to do these moots and other things. Like, they put you in front of rough and tough people whose job it is to try to knock you down and put you off balance or whatever. The only way you could do it is, like I said, prepare, know your material left and right. And as you get more experience, you learn better to kind of roll with the punches. You learn better to do things like that. Like, what one professor told me, sometimes you'll go to court and the judge will say right out front is, I've read your factum and I don't agree with a word. What do you have to say to that? Right? If something like that happens, and stuff like that has happened to me to an extent, you just kind of, the best thing to do is not panic and just think about how I'm going to get my head above water. So you take a breath and you tell them, okay, well, Your Honor, if you turn to page 5, we discuss this, and then you just kind of go with it to an extent. And the thing about judges and adjudicators is they almost always listen. Sometimes they prejudge things before court, but they understand that everyone's entitled to their day in court. So, I've seen lawyers get eviscerated out front, and then as the hearing goes on, they're able to get their heads above water and make good submissions and get the judge's attention, and sometimes even win. But the point is, to be patient and don't let a judge or anyone else rattle you. Just stay on point and make your submissions based on what you have.
Now, certainly over the last year, there's been a big change with respect to delivering submissions. I think for the most part, I mean, some are still happening in person in some jurisdictions. What have you found? I'm not sure if you've had a variety of different things in, let's say, Zoom court. What has that experience been like for you, and how is it different than being before, at Osgoode Hall, or at a anywhere really at Superior Court, where you'd have to deliver that in person?
Well, Zoom hearings in a lot of ways are more laid back. I mean, one thing is when you go to court, you have to gown, right? If you go into Superior Court in front of a judge, you have to wear your robe. In Zoom, you don't. They are actually introducing a directive now um, where they're bringing that back, and I think the reason is people were being too fast and loose with the directives. I mean, I had one hearing where there was the guy on the other side was a very senior lawyer from a very big firm, and he showed up to this Zoom hearing in the morning. He was wearing a hoodie, he was unshaven, and he just his attitude and everything, he seemed to just have zero respect for it. Like he didn't think of it as a court at all, and his submissions weren't even organized. It was just like we're doing here. It was just like he was sitting there talking to the judge, and the judge didn't say it, but you could tell he was not impressed by the way this guy was acting. But no matter how respectful and everything you are, Zoom advocacy, it's going to seem more laid back because they say when you're arguing something, the term is like, I'm on my feet a lot, which means you're arguing because you are literally on your feet. When you're doing something over Zoom, you're not. You're sitting down. You could stand up if you want, but that'd be kind of weird. So judges don't mind if you're sitting down when you're doing a Zoom hearing. And because of that, they are much more concise. So when you're doing a hearing over Zoom, you have to think, okay, a judge, is not going to want to stare at their screen and hear people like in talking heads or whatever for this much time. So in some ways, it's good because it streamlines the process a lot. But you have to kind of approach it that way to think like a judge is not going to have the same kind of energy to hear a 5-hour argument. So in this case, you have to keep it more concise than you usually would, which is sometimes easier said than done, but you have to try your best to do that because it's not just that you're hearing things on Zoom, but everyone is friggin' exhausted these days. Everyone is exhausted. We are burnt out. We are sick of. It's great being here today, JP, but we are sick of staring at screens. We are sick of Zoom meetings and all of that. So when you're doing Zoom advocacy, you have to think of it that way and respect people that way and think to keep things. You like I said, you already should get to the point, but in this case, even more so.
Now let's switch gears there because you just brought it up. Perfect timing here about burnout and workplace burnout. And I know you wrote an article, maybe it was sometime last year there in Precedent, I recall, about that. And certainly
Mhm.
you do a lot of initiatives we can talk about as well, with the Law Society and beyond. So how do we deal with mental health in our profession, and burnout and stress and anxiety and all sorts of different other things related, especially with a pandemic, and especially where junior lawyers are being told, put your head down and work and go with the flow and do your best, and make sure you hit those billable hour targets, and there's a bright future in here for you, right? What do you say
Mhm.
to that?
Well, I mean, it's a loaded question, and that was an article I was working on and wrote in Precedent even before COVID hit, right? So burnout was already very much a reality in this profession, and it's a reality everywhere, and it's one that people need to be aware of. And if you're aware of it more, I mean, you deal with it more. Like law school, we're both fight fans. Like you remember what happened with George St. Pierre. He was champion. He was on this undefeated streak. And remember when he quit, he came back for this one fight a couple years ago. But before that, he said the reason was he was burnt out. He said I wasn't sleeping at night or anything anymore, right? I couldn't. He just could not do it. And this is someone who was like literally an Ironman athlete and known as one of the toughest people in the world. And like even it's ultimate fighting is different from practicing law. But every time I thought about burnout, like that always came to mind from me. And in this profession, and you notice that in my article, because there were statistics published on that, that it is more prevalent than most professions, burnout here. And it's because, not just because our work is hard and demanding and strenuous, it just because the nature of the work kind of leads to difficulties in a lot of ways. And lawyers oftentimes have kind of, and paralegals and other people in this profession have kind of, you know, existential issues with what they're doing sometimes. And it's not because our work is meaningless, but because when it gets repetitive and it gets to kind of feel that way, then that combined with overwork and stress kind of creates this feeling where you feel kind of worthless and tired, and you just feel like you do not want to do it anymore. And if you feel that way, it is normal, especially in this profession. If you don't feel burnt out at least one time, then you have my admiration, because you made it of steel. But the way to deal with it is, I mean, self-care, self-care. And it is not reading those articles about like 27 things you could do before breakfast to feel better about yourself, like, keep a journal, then meditate, then eat healthy food, then do yoga. Those are all good things, but you need to kind of be aware of your thermostat, of your internal temperature. There's a great book called Self Reg by Stuart Shanker that I recommend everybody read in every profession, because it really kind of helps with that. It helps you kind of keep the finger on the pulse of your own mental health. So, it means taking time off, real time off from work, not a staycation. It means booking time away from the office and sticking to it. It doesn't mean that when vacation time's approaching and things start heating up, you think, okay, I might have to cancel my vacation. I've seen people do that all the time in this profession, and it is a mistake, because the more you do that, the more it's going to hurt you down the line. So you have to decide beforehand. And then if your boss tells you, well, we have to schedule this thing on this day, say, no, sorry, I have a vacation booked. If they say, well, if you do it and you're either do it and you're fired, which they won't, then that's a different story. But you have to do that and respect your own time, and you have to do whatever self-care you have. Like, I don't know if you remember when we were in law school, they told us, when exam time comes, you're going to feel overwhelmed and you push everything aside. Don't do that. Like, if you normally walk your dog, keep walking your dog. Don't put every aspect of your life on hold. You should exercise regularly, something everyone should always do anyway. And when you get busy at work, you shouldn't put your physical health aside. Doesn't mean like eating bad food and not exercise whenever. Find time to do it, because it always pays dividends in the end. Like I said, all this stuff is easier said than done, but it's something you have to do and you have to be aware of, or you're just going to hate your life in general. And like I said, in this profession, that's especially prevalent.
Now, certainly, since and a lot of the people here are students, and you mentioned they're like not breaking up that routine just because it may be an exam, or for us in law school, they were all around the same week or 2 weeks, or you'd have papers. I remember contemplating a couple times, like, do I write the paper or do I write the exam? What's going to take me the less time, or what should I have started on earlier? What else did you find while being in law school kind of helped you get through the 3 years there, in terms of getting through everything, understanding everything, and becoming successful afterwards? Anything you can share there with relation to mental health, especially we're talking about, besides watching all the UFC fights there. And that was great that George St. Pierre somehow got referenced in here. But in a lot of ways, actually, I have a question on that right after. But in a lot of ways that students right now, I mean, they're dealing with so much more than we were. I mean, we have to worry maybe about a strike here and then, but what would you say from this perspective of what you just shared there, but within the school perspective?
Well, I didn't, all the advice I'm given now, I was aware of it to an extent in law school, but I didn't take that advice. Like, when exam season hit, I was a ghost like everyone else. I didn't go to the gym. I didn't eat healthy. I didn't do anything other than read and study every Friday night, every Saturday night. I wouldn't take meaningful breaks. I wouldn't spend time with friends. I just push everything aside and tell us like, don't worry, when this is all done, we're all going to go out and get loaded and have fun. And we did. But, it's not the people I knew who did better and went on to good careers and everything. Some of them were the people who would go to class and then go straight to the library after class. I knew people like that in law school, and I could not believe it. After class, I was a corpse. I was exhausted. But some people just said, I need to remember everything. So after class, they would run to the library and go over their notes and organize it and spend hours doing it. And most of those people did very well. But I also noticed that people who were more laid back went on to great things too, in a lot of ways. And those are the people who just refused to put their lives on hold. They took school seriously, but at the same time, they didn't forget that there was a world outside of school that they couldn't ignore. So they would spend time with friends, both inside and outside of law school. They would go out for meals. They would go to movies. They would walk their dogs, like we mentioned before too. And they found, a lot of them told me that they found themselves just being much more productive. Like when they did sit down to study, had more of a clear head, and they had more gas in the tank, and they were just able to do things that way. So, I mean, if you're one of those working machines where you could just work nonstop and then reset your clock by going out and having drinks with your friends after exams are over, I mean, more power to you. But to be more effective, I honestly think that that you just take time to balance that more, and don't be so afraid. Don't be afraid to think, oh man, if I go out for a drink with my friends tonight, am I going to fall this far behind or anything? No, just think about it as clearing space in your head, and you'll be more effective when the time comes. I know it's easier said than done, like I said, but it's something to be aware of no matter what.
Now, since law school, and I know right now you're involved in a number of things. We had yesterday for my students at Trios, Treasurer Teresa Donnelly joined and was sharing about things like the Coach and Advisory Network and the Member Assistance Program, and I know Doran Gold's coming back in a few weeks as well. So perhaps, I know you're involved with a lot of those things. Maybe you can share the impact of that, and why mentorship is important, especially for young lawyers and paralegals, rather than going and risking their entire though discipline. They can be disciplined, certainly law pro, everything like that. We have resources like that, and what have you found the experience now being on the other side, providing mentorship and guidance to young lawyers and perhaps young paralegals as well?
Yeah, well, I think in this profession, both on the lawyer and paralegal side, mentorship is extremely important because, doing the law is not like cutting glass or anything like that. I mean, this profession is very esoteric, and you just cannot learn it in school. You learn important things in law school and in the programs you teach, but they cannot teach you how to be a good lawyer, and they cannot teach you how to get on in this profession. That you can only learn by experience. But a lot of the time, people will come out of law school or even finish their articling or whatever else, and then get thrown in and have no idea what to do. So for me, I was fortunate to always have good mentorship throughout my career. And it was something like last week Sudevi was talking about, is people mentored her whether they liked it or not. And and that was very important for her development. So, I believe in giving back in that way, and because I've had that help. So the Coach and Advisor Network is a great resource for people to reach out, for people who are looking for jobs or to become a better lawyer or just kind of know how to navigate the profession better. They match you up with somebody who has been there or could help them with certain things, who is willing to lend time because they're doing it on a volunteer basis to help them out. If they need help with their resume, if they're not sure where they want to practice, if they need tips on how to practice effectively, just know that resource is there. It's free, and the people there are, we get no credit for it of any sort. You know, you can put it on your resume if you want, but you don't do it for that reason. It's not like, it's not resume fodder. So just know that that resource is available and very effective. Now, it's the same with the member assistance program. Now, that's a little different. That is for lawyers who are dealing with mental health issues, addiction issues, or I'm not going to say more serious problems because all problems are created equal in a lot of ways, but problems of that nature who really do need somebody to talk to. They don't need someone who could just solve their problems for them, but they need support and a sounding board. And that's why we're here for that, because there is a lot of that in this profession. Like aside from burnout, this is, you know, people deal with a lot of difficult things. People are overworked. There's a lot, people have had a lot of awful experience. There's a lot of lawyers who have alcohol and substance abuse issues that they've been dealing with. The stories I've heard, like I can't repeat them here, would like, they've given me pause, and you wouldn't believe it. But don't think that you need to be suffering on that level to take advantage of it. If you're having problems, if you're having any kind of mental health issues, if you're unsure of certain things and you need help, not nearly enough people take advantage of this resource and they suffer in silence. Don't forget, like it's anonymous. It's not going to be advertised that you're using it. We are all very professional. If I get paired up with somebody and I give them advice, I don't tell anybody who they are unless they want me to, or unless, you know, I'd have to call the police if I think that they were going to hurt themselves or others. But other than that, it's completely anonymous, and it's a resource where you could just talk to somebody. And that, you know, that helps with mentoring in general, not just for mental health. They don't just need somebody to guide them and tell them what to do and give them advice. Oftentimes, they just need someone who's going to listen to them. And that could be just as, if not more important than that. So these resources, I always tell people over and over, and I cannot stress them enough, that they're there, they're free, they're available, and people should use them.
And I did just want to add for the paralegal or law students listening that it's available to you as well. You don't have to be licensed as a paralegal or a lawyer as long as you're in the program at a school, as well as your family members. It is available for you for free, and it's confidential. It's not like it's going to come back. It's not like Dan's going to call up the law society and say, hey, Treasurer Donnelly, you may want to pause on this person's application because this is what they told me, right? So completely confidential and free. Now, on that point there, related to getting mentorship from the Coach and Advisory Network, for students, I mean, there are plenty of opportunities these days. A little bit different, but there are platforms like LinkedIn that I know you've talked about using LinkedIn to boost your legal career. So can you share some of those tips there for students, especially now in a pandemic? It's not as easy to go to have a coffee at Starbucks and ask a senior lawyer or a senior paralegal a few questions. How can you leverage LinkedIn to be a successful boost to your legal career?
Well, you're right. I mean, I did write an article on that. You could find it in it was Precedent, yeah, Precedent magazine. I was thinking Precedent or Precedent JD, but it's Precedent. So it's a short, concise article. Take a look at it because it gives kind of fundamental tips on how to do that. First of all, if you don't have a LinkedIn page, get a LinkedIn page. You know, that's where people are going to go. If they hear your name, they're going to look on LinkedIn. It's like not having your name in the phone book when phone books were still a thing. Like it's the only way they could find out anything about you. And not just that, not just to find out things about you, it's a way to promote yourself. And I've known people who made themselves look so good on paper through LinkedIn that they were able to find a lot more success than other people who had arguably better grades or better accolades or whatever, just by being able to sell themselves. And these people weren't dishonest. They just kind of had like a great profile. So if the tips are enumerated in the article, but aside from building your network or anything, you want to personalize your page and you want to describe yourself in that way. Like, you know, for lawyers, you don't just call yourself a litigator, you know, call yourself like a commercial litigator specializing in cybersecurity, you know, put in buzzwords, put in keywords, list your work experiences, not, if you've had like three great jobs in the law profession and then worked at Tim Hortons 20 years ago, that part doesn't need to go on. Just like anything else, you don't want to muddle it and throw everything on it. But if you've worked on any initiatives, if you've done volunteer work, say in law school or paralegal college, that you think people might be interested in, put it in. Like, think about it as kind of a resume in that way. And keep it there and promote it. So, read the article. You could look at my LinkedIn page, because I like to think I practice what I preach in that regard. And, just kind of peruse people, and think about which ones are eye popping. And, another thing, it may seem obvious, but the first thing people look at is your picture on LinkedIn. Like, they've done studies on this, and they show how people's eyes scan through a LinkedIn page. And the first thing is your picture. And I know some established people who are looking for better things, and I've gone to the LinkedIn page, and they have like an old black and white photo that looks unprofessional and looks nothing like them. So, if you don't work for an employer with a professional headshot, go in and get one. It doesn't cost a lot of money to get a good picture done. Get that and put it on, because it is something very important. And then your description, and then your accolades. Like, you'll see how people's eyes scan when they read a LinkedIn page, and that's how you make it look good. And Twitter is a good platform too. There's a good book called Social Media for Lawyers, which focuses most on Twitter and how to use that. Now, some people swear by it. I personally don't think that Twitter is as effective as LinkedIn to grow your professional profile, but there's nothing wrong with getting involved in Twitter. There's one, hashtag Law Twitter in Ontario, which is a very good community of lawyers who help each other and give each other advice. And sometimes people are job hunting or whatever, and they say, "Hey, Law Twitter, I'm looking for a job in this. If you could share this, that'd be great." And then it gets disseminated, and I know people who have found meaningful employment that way. So, I mean, I would focus on LinkedIn to start, but there's nothing wrong with getting involved on Twitter too. But um, you might want to, we might, I don't know if we're covering this later, but when it comes to sharing content too, it's something you need to think about. Share content. Don't share content that people are not going to read. Those, sometimes people post those math equations, like if you have 5 bananas and 2 clocks, it equals 20. So if you have 2 clocks and 5 rabbits, what does that mean? And stuff like that. Like, stuff like that looks like spam, and a lot of people like to post it because they think it gets them attention. Don't do it, because you want people to take you seriously, and they don't want to hear about stuff like that and other content that may be reserved for like Instagram and Facebook. If you're into that, stick to Instagram or Facebook. But when you're using LinkedIn or Twitter to that extent, always keep it professional and only share content that you think people might be interested in.
So what about, I guess, in terms of what you're saying there about how do you, let's say, from the perspective of a student, right? You're not maybe in a position to be authoring as much, or you may have this imposter syndrome. Hey, I'm just a paralegal student, I'm just a law student in my first year, who's going to want to read what I have out there. What can you do to kind of boost your presence there, other than just, hey, let me go and add Dan right now and just say, hey, Dan, is your law firm hiring? I'm looking for a position, please. And I just heard you talk on in JP's Justice and Peace series, sincerely, Joe student, right? I mean, should they be doing anything like that, or what should they be doing to approach you, first of all? And how can you kind of build your profile there if you don't necessarily have that scholarly writing or any writing there, like stuff that goes in all the legal publications? What else can you do?
Well, LinkedIn has a good platform for producing content. You could publish articles on LinkedIn and make them look very good. I mean, so what you could do is write something, decide what you want to write about. Like I said, a relevant topic, not about your day or about your cat or anything like that. And they publish it with their own internal mechanism, and you could go to different websites. So there's one I like called Pexels. It's PEXELS.com, which has free public domain high res images, and you could search. They have thousands and thousands of them. Choose one that you like and use it to accompany your article. And if you do it that way, it looks like a very professional article that was written on your LinkedIn page. So if you have like an area of the law you want to publish, or you want to write about just some kind of career advice or whatever, I have read some spectacular stuff that has been published on LinkedIn that way. So if you don't have a blog or a scholarly publication or a magazine that's going to give you a platform to do that, then self-publish that way. That resource is there, it's available. And like I said, if you choose a good image or whatever, you could use something that's eye-catching and do it that way. Now, I mean, in terms of reaching out, me personally, I have no problem with it. If people are looking for a job or looking for general advice, to just shoot me a note on LinkedIn and say, do you have time for a 5-minute Zoom chat? Just to get acquainted. Because before Zoom, like before COVID and all that, I always encourage people to go out and network in that way. If there's a firm you're interested in, a lawyer you're more interested in, or whatever, just go to reach out to them and say, hi, here's who I am. Do you have time for a 5-minute coffee at some time? Worst case scenarios, they say no. And it's not a bad thing. If you do go to these meetings and they say yes, be prepared. There was a great article written in Precedent a couple years ago called Networking Coffees from Hell by Erin Cowling. And she gives great advice on what you should and should not be doing if you reach out for someone for networking, for their time. It's about how to respect their time and what not to do. It's an excellent article, and I recommend it to everybody. So, if you want to do that, go ahead. Like, send somebody a note on LinkedIn, say, hi, here's who I am. This is what I'm looking for. Could you spare a few minutes? If you can't, I completely understand. And now with Zoom, it's easier than ever. Personally, I think when this is all over, I'd rather go back to be doing these things in person than over Zoom, just because it's always better to meet somebody in person. Just my thought, and I miss it terribly. But it's something I still do. If there's a lawyer or someone else who I want to learn more from, or who I want to pick their brain about something, or for business development or something, that's what I do. I reach out to them on LinkedIn and I say, do you have time for a coffee? And like I said, worst case scenario is they say no. One thing though is, if you don't get a response, it's okay to follow up once, but don't be writing them every 2 days saying, I haven't heard back from you. Like, do you have time? If you don't, it's fine. Like, wait a week or so, follow up once, and if they don't respond, then move on. But never be afraid to do it. Don't be afraid to reach out to anybody at all. Just, if you do, make sure to read that article and make sure to come prepared.
I see a question here in relation to work, perhaps in a firm environment, of how do you prioritize, maybe when you're a junior lawyer, or just a junior at a firm, in terms of what cases to do first? Do you take the easiest sort of one? Do you take the ones that are more complex afterwards? Or is it based on a first come, first serve basis? Or is it who the partner that's giving you the work? What should you do?
You don't get to choose when you're starting out. You do what you're told. If there's something that somebody gives you and you have no idea what you're doing and you're out of your depth, then you ask questions. Never, ever make the mistake of taking on an assignment, not knowing what you're doing, and then being too shy to ask, and then turning in something that's completely wrong. People are not going to remember and think badly of you if you ask questions, even if the questions are off to them, if you do a good job. If you don't do that and you turn in bad work, that's what people are going to remember. Like, one tip I always give students is, students and juniors, try to impress people by turning it around really fast. I mean, you give them the assignment, they stay up all night and they put it on your desk the next morning, even though you don't need it the next morning. And oftentimes you get that and the work is terrible, and the reason it's not good is because it's rushed. And people are not going to remember, hey, that guy is awesome, that guy or girl, whoever, is awesome because they did it so fast. They're going to remember good work and bad work. If somebody takes 3 days to do something and it's an excellent work product, if somebody takes a half an hour to do something and it's not good, the former is the person you're going to want to do work for down the line. So, like I said, always ask questions. If you are too shy, I mean, sometimes people in this profession are mean and bullying and act like they don't have time for you. Go to someone else and ask too, but don't just try to figure it out on your own. Don't do that. That will be fatal to what you're doing. And then later, as you move on through your career, you could choose a little bit more, but if you're still working for other people, then you're still going to have to do your job and do what you're told to an extent.
And I see another question you talked about before in terms of experiences, but what if you're starting in the field, right? Or you're a student and you don't have a background in law, but you have a variety of different experiences in service industry, what have you. What should you do in terms of building a LinkedIn profile? Like, you just have something completely blank, or should you be referencing some of your only experiences that you have on your profile or even on your resume?
Well, yeah, I mean, reference what you can, it's relevant. And, one thing people always told me in journalism school is if you don't have clippings, like things to write about, go out and get them. Don't try to fabricate things all the ways. Go out and get them. So in this profession, like anywhere else, there's always going to be volunteer experiences, the opportunities rather, and things like that. There's always going to be ways that you could get your feet wet and get into it. So you don't want to list 6 things on your LinkedIn profile that don't matter. Like like I said, if you worked as a waiter 15 years ago, it's not going to help you, right? People are just going to think, okay, they're just kind of trying to pad their profile and then they'll see it that way. And that's not important. So do things, get involved, and then you could have a lot of things to list right away that help, right? And like say if you go to a blog for whatever, and there's always blogs out there that will accept content, and you publish things on there, you could say like contributor to this blog, to this legal blog, put it on your profile. Like even if you're not on staff, but you're still doing that, you're contributing, you're writing. So you could put that on your profile. If you volunteer with like the coach and advisor network, anything like that, you could always do it. But like I said, never take people's intelligence for granted. These are all smart people. If you're putting things on for padding that don't matter, people are going to see through that. So if you don't have the experience, go get it. There are ways, there's always ways to do it. There's a lot of opportunity here for law and law adjacent stuff. So, it's out there, put your finger on it.
Now, to remember the question I wanted to ask earlier when you referenced George St. Pierre, as much as you say that the fight industry, right, is different than being a lawyer. I mean, there are a lot of parallels, right? I mean, it's an adversarial process. But I was thinking about this. I don't know, I had a guest on a while ago, and I asked, with Zoom, I mean, you were saying it's a lot less formal. If they gave you the opportunity to have like a walk-up music before you got to go as the plaintiff's counsel or defense counsel, what would you pick then?
Well, I wouldn't say there's a lot of things in common between fighting in a cage and practicing law. It is adversarial, but yeah, man, I'm gonna have to get back to you on that one, JP. Sorry, that wasn't expecting to be put on the spot with that one. Maybe, when you think about old wrestling music, there was that one Dire Straits song. I think it was Money for Nothing was a good one. So yeah, I think I'd choose that as a walk-up music until I think of something better.
All right, Dan, thank you so much for joining us here today. It's always nice to reconnect from our days in the Obiter. I didn't know you were a ringer back then with all the journalism experience you had at the time, but it's always great to reconnect. And certainly another thing there for students is cherish the relationships and the connections you make in school. It's not just about learning the law; it's about networking as well with your peers. Because I mean, how many of them came back and have spoken to you? Mainly from 15 years ago, where we would have a bunch of classes together and a bunch of extracurriculars like Obiter Dicta and mock trial here with me and Dan. Any final words of advice for students looking to get into the profession? And thanks again for joining us today.
Uh, well, the final advice, it's things that we've touched on, and something that you just touched on too, is in this profession, relationships are everything. So, like I said, you might be one of those people who go to class and then go to the library and no one knows who you are, and you could still be very successful that way. Don't get me wrong. But career paths in this profession are so far from linear, you would not believe. Like, some people do follow a linear career path, but most lawyers, and I can't speak for paralegals as much, but most lawyers do not. And what matters is the relationships you make, because you never know where people are going to end up. And when they do end up somewhere, that could be, I don't want to say advantageous, but something you would be interested in, you want those people to be your friends already. Like, one thing that always comes to mind for me is one of my former mentors, one of the first mentors, when I started in law, is become very well known. She became a very senior person at one of the major banks, and in that position, she could assign huge multi-million, I'm talking like $50 million files, to lawyers at different places and work with outside counsel. And she told me that, when she got that position, she had already been practicing law for over 20 years. And she started getting emails from people that she literally had not spoken to since law school. They were saying, "Hey, how's it going? I was thinking about the other day how we should reconnect. It's been too long. Are you available for lunch sometime?" And other people who she had not heard from in years, who she really had no idea who they were saying the same thing. Like, I've been missing you. Let's reconnect. Let's have lunch. And she had more lunch invites than she could handle. And most of them were for people. Some of them, like I said, she didn't even know who they were. And she was clearly not a stupid person. It was obvious these people were just there to hit her up for work. And, that's fine. It's part of the profession. But, the work she ended up assigning did not go to those people. It went to people that she already knew. So make good friends, keep those relationships going after. Some of the best friends I've met, and, with my wife, I've met in law school. And it was just, that's the thing that surprised me most about law school. People like told me that they were just going to be a bunch of stuck up douchebags, and they were ultra competitive and things were going to be impossible, and that was true to an extent. But there were so many amazing people there that I met and that are still my friends and that I still get along with, and we are all in such different careers, and we always have stories to share and everything. So for students, and I'm sure this is true for paralegals too, is I cannot stress it enough, and I know it might be harder in COVID, but make good friends. Don't just spend your time studying. Your relationships in the end are going to be more important than your knowledge and your grades. And that's hard to accept now because it's not true in the first couple years out, but the further out you get, you are going to see that more and more. That's the first thing. And the second thing, JP, also something we talked about, is everybody create content. Last time I was on with you, I recommended everyone read that book by Gary Vaynerchuk called Crushing It. It's something that anybody could read in any profession because it's important for the most part. Now, I gave you that tip on how to write for LinkedIn, but find other places where you could write, where you could speak, where you could volunteer, where you could be involved. You'll find it fulfilling, and you'll find it will help your career dividends. Maybe not the next day, but as you move through your career. I mean, people write to me now and say, "I read this article you wrote and I need a lawyer who could help with this. And I noticed you wrote something about it." And I looked, and that was an article I wrote 3 years ago. But that's the best part about the internet, is stuff is still out there and your name is still out there. And that's what you could do for yourself. I know it's hard to do it first, but try to make time to do it, because you will be thankful in the end.
It just reminded me of our Saved by the Bell skit. I guess Jesse and Slater for life in more ways than one there. So thanks so much. Always a pleasure. Keep in touch. I guess once the pandemic, I don't know, dies out, but when the restrictions maybe loosen up, we could have another gathering there with everyone and their families, like we did. I don't know, it's maybe 2 years ago now. They're at Ross's residence. So thanks again, Dan, and wishing you all the best, and take care, everyone.
Thanks for having me. And everyone, find me on LinkedIn and feel free to reach out if you have any more questions. Thank you,
Daniel.
JP. Thank you, everybody. Take care.
Thanks, Daniel. Thanks,
Take care.
JP.